Hey, how's it going everyone? This is William here. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about panning with your DJI gimbal. Now, there are plenty of ways to actually do panning. I'm just showing you my way. This is a basic technique that all of us use, and there's definitely different ways to do it. I'm just showing you my preferred method, and then you can kind of build on top of it, or you can kind of improve upon it however you like, but definitely everybody has their own personal preference. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is this specific joystick right here. Now, this joystick is actually a great joystick. They put a lot of effort into making this joystick a really professional feeling joystick, which means when you actually pan with it, it gives you a lot of feedback. One thing that's really nice about that joystick is that if you put the joystick all the way to the plastic, there's actually a notch right here. So when you actually push the joystick all the way to the plastic to the left or right, you can actually feel it go into a notch, which means you know exactly when you're panning perfectly horizontally, and that's something that's super important. Now, one thing you'll notice is that when I'm holding it all the way to the right or left, my panning on the screen is extremely slow. In fact, this is the panning speed that I prefer to have. And that is what's really important to me here. And this is why I like my technique, is that you really want to be able to bang that joystick all the way to the plastic, because what's going to allow you to do when you bang it all the way to the plastic is going to allow you to be very consistent. Every single time you pan, if you bang it to the plastic, you know you're always going to get that consistent smooth speed, and that's what's really important. If you're going to have your joystick pretty much hovering around in the middle, if you're using the default speeds, it's just not going to be very consistent, because we can't really hold our thumbs consistently in one spot very easily. It's going to move around a little bit. So let's go ahead and look at my user profiles, and I can show you the speeds that I like to use for my panning. Again, keep in mind that these are just my personal preferences. Don't take those as gospel. Anything that you do, you definitely want to try out for yourself to make sure you actually like what I'm doing, and then kind of add your own personal taste to it. So one thing that you'll notice is that when you actually go through all of the modes, if I go to mode 2, it's a pan follow, and mode 3 is a pan follow. What I like to do across all of my modes, I like to have them all do the same things. It's just that I have different settings for each. That way I actually have 3 custom settings to use for any type of shooting event that I want to do. If I need to change it to one of these other custom settings, I'm going to change it across all of the modes. That way it gives me maximum flexibility for what I'm doing right now, not trying to set it up for multiple things so that it's easier when I shoot between different types of shots, because I want maximum flexibility for the shot that I'm doing right now, not trying to plan for something in the future. Once I'm done with the shot that I want, then I can move on to the next one and then adjust accordingly across all of my modes. So let's go ahead and go into the controls, and we'll go into the motion tab. So what you see here is that my pan is set to 14. My tilt, which is up and down, is a little bit slower at 13. I feel like for most of my pans, I do want the tilt to be slower. And then my roll, if I actually use roll, is at a 15. So those are my default settings that I like to use. Again, this is a lot of personal preference right here. So you definitely need to play with these in order to figure out what you want to do. Now, when I go to mode 2, it's still pan follow. If I go into the controls, what you'll notice is that this is actually roll instead of pan. So I'm actually controlling the roll of my gimbal with mode 2. And again, I have 14, tilt of 13, and then roll of 15. So all I'm doing here is from mode 1 to mode 2 is that this one controls roll in mode 2. In mode 1, if I go into controls, it controls pan. So that's the two differences between mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 3, I keep mostly at the defaults. This is my high speed one. So if you go into the controls and the motion here, what you'll notice is that I actually have it on the defaults, which is high, high, and high again. So this allows me to make very fast adjustments to the gimbal settings. But again, it's not very useful for a lot of different things. But when you actually do need to get your gimbal to a specific spot, having the joystick move very quickly is definitely very useful. This is more of a utility mode for me. In other words, just before we're starting to shoot or record something, I'll go into mode 3, get the gimbal into the position that I want. Then I'll either go back to mode 1 or 2 to get that slow panning if I actually need it. So this is definitely a utility mode, but mode 1 and 2 are definitely the ones that I stick with when I need to make very fine adjustments. Now, another thing that you should consider when you're doing your pans is actually increasing your shutter speed so that you actually get a sharper image while you're doing that panning motion. It's going to give you a nice sharp image even though there is motion in the scene. And the way to do it very easily is to go ahead and just double your frame rate. So for instance, if I'm using 4K 30p, the standard shutter angle at 180 would be doubling the shutter speed, so I would usually have it at 60 frames, but when I'm doing my pans, I might do a few at 125 frames so that I actually double that even further so that I actually capture less motion blur. This is definitely something that you should experiment with, try out, see if you actually like the image that comes back from it, and figure out what styles you want, and definitely have multiple takes with different types of shutter speeds and seeing which one actually works for you for that particular scene or event or whatever you're trying to capture. So that was a quick look on how I use panning and tilting on my DJI gimbal. If you have any questions, definitely leave it in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.